Saguntum stood south of the Ebro, and that should make the story simple. Rome and Hasdrubal had made an agreement. Carthage would not cross the Ebro in arms. Saguntum lay below that river, closer to New Carthage than to the northern frontier, and therefore inside the space where Punic power was already growing. On the map, the line seems to settle the matter, but the map is too clean. Saguntum was not only a point south of a river. It was a fortified city near the Mediterranean coast, prosperous, old, and divided. Some of its people traded naturally with the Punic world. Others looked to Rome, the rising power that had already taken Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and command of the Western Sea. A pro-Roman party inside the city had appealed to Rome before the crisis. Roman intervention in Saguntine politics had already left wounds behind. By the time Hannibal looked north from New Carthage, Saguntum was not neutral ground. It was an argument made of walls, factions, treaties, and memory. The legal question mattered because both sides needed law to carry power. Rome could say Saguntum was under its protection and therefore could not be attacked. Hannibal could answer that Saguntum lay south of the Ebro, in the sphere where Rome had no right to interfere. Grant his right to slow the judgment down. The rights and wrongs are hard to determine because the treaty itself is obscure. Later tradition is partisan, and the surviving accounts arrive through Roman and pro-Roman channels. The Ebro agreement also had a purpose larger than Saguntum. Rome wanted Carthaginian forces kept away from the north, away from the Pyrenees, and away from possible contact with the Gauls of northern Italy. Massilia, Rome's Greek ally, had its own interests along the Spanish coast and reason to fear revived Punic strength. A river line could calm several anxieties at once: Massilian trade, Roman security, Gallic pressure, and the growth of Barcid power. It could not answer what happened when a Roman-connected city lay on the wrong side of that line. The Second Punic War did not begin with a line being crossed by accident. It began with two powers discovering that a line was not enough. Once a protected city sat on the wrong side of the river, every interpretation became a weapon. Before Saguntum became the crisis, Hannibal had to prove he could command Spain. He inherited the Barcid system in 221 BC, but inheritance was not the same as possession. His father had opened the Spanish project. Hasdrubal had consolidated it with New Carthage, diplomacy, marriage politics, and the Ebro agreement. Hannibal received the army's choice and Carthage's ratification, but a young commander still had to show the men, allies, subjects, enemies, and rivals that command had not weakened in the transfer. His first campaigns did the preliminary work of command. He moved against the Olcades, taking their strongest city and exacting tribute. Then he struck at the Vacii, including Hermandica and Arbucala. These campaigns pushed Punic authority inland and northward, but they also did something more immediate. They distributed money, proved energy, and reminded the Spanish communities that Hasdrubal's murder had not opened a space into which resistance could safely spread. Hannibal returned to New Carthage after each campaigning season not as a caretaker of inherited authority, but as a commander visibly adding to it. The harder test came when enemies from several groups gathered against him. Freeman gives the most dramatic version of the fighting around the Tagus, Hannibal avoiding a direct open clash with a larger force, crossing the river by night, luring pursuers into the water, and striking them while the current and elephants broke their formation. The details deserve the usual caution around ancient battle narrative, but the strategic result is clear. Hannibal came back to New Carthage with his reputation enlarged. That reputation mattered inside Spain before it mattered in Rome. A mixed army follows a young commander for different reasons: pay, habit, family loyalty, fear, admiration, and hope of plunder. A Spanish town watches him with a different calculation: whether to submit early, wait, bargain, call for allies, or resist. By the end of the campaigns against the Olcades, Vacii, Carpetani, and fugitives from earlier defeats, Hannibal had answered the immediate question. The Barcid command had not gone soft. Saguntum remained the exception, and exceptions were dangerous in a system built on visible submission. The city had natural defenses and strong walls on a ridge near the sea. It was not a village caught in the path of an army. It was a wealthy trading center with food, weapons, factions, and diplomatic reach. Its appeal to Rome made sense from inside the city. If Hannibal was now the unquestioned power in Spain, Saguntum needed an outside counterweight. Rome was the only one large enough. For Hannibal, Saguntum was dangerous for the same reason. A protected Roman friend south of the Ebro threatened the internal logic of Barcid Spain. If Rome could protect a city there, then the Ebro line did not really confine Roman influence. If Saguntum could defy him and remain untouched, other communities could learn that Punic power had limits. If Hannibal attacked, he risked war with Rome. If he did not attack, he risked making Roman protection more valuable than Punic fear throughout the south. In that sense, Saguntum was not only a pretext for a wider war. It was a local Spanish problem with Mediterranean consequences. This tension makes Hannibal's choice intelligible without making it inevitable. He did not have to want immediate war with Rome for Saguntum to become intolerable. A commander who had just taken tribute inland and rebuilt fear around New Carthage could not easily leave a fortified exception on the coast, advertised as Roman protected, watching his authority from inside his own claimed sphere. The Roman embassy came to New Carthage in late 220. That date matters because later Roman tradition had reasons to blur the sequence. If the embassy could be placed during the siege itself, Rome might appear more active in defense of Saguntum. Steinby follows the stronger reconstruction. The envoys came before the siege, after Saguntine warnings and amid rising concern about Hannibal's Spanish campaigns. They met him not in Carthage, not in Rome, but in the Spanish capital Hasdrubal had built. The scene is almost too clean visually. Roman legates in a Barcid palace, the harbour below, mine roads behind the city, and the Ebro somewhere far to the north as a diplomatic line neither side trusted. The envoys warned Hannibal to keep away from Saguntum and not to cross the Ebro. Rome said Saguntum was under its protection. Hannibal refused the implied hierarchy of the conversation. His counterargument had two parts inside the treaty dispute. The first part was geography joined to treaty language. Saguntum lay south of the Ebro. If the agreement limited Carthaginian armed movement north of the river, Hannibal could say it gave Rome no authority to manage cities below it. Goldsworthy's framing is useful here because it shows the asymmetry. The treaty limited Carthage, but did not obviously limit Rome, at least in Roman use. Grant goes further into the uncertainty, suggesting that some kind of reciprocal understanding may have been assumed, even if it was not ratified or preserved clearly enough for later historians to settle. The second part was Saguntum's internal politics. Hannibal accused Rome of unjustly killing or helping kill leading men in the city during a recent factional quarrel. The exact details are not secure, but the broad point is important. Saguntum was not a pure external alliance dropped into a treaty dispute. It had domestic factions, some leaning Punic, some leaning Roman or independent under Roman protection. When Rome intervened, Hannibal could frame it as interference inside his sphere. When Hannibal threatened the city, Rome could frame it as aggression against a protected friend. Both arguments could be made sincerely, and both could be useful. Saguntum became such a powerful crisis because it allowed each side to believe, or at least say, that the other had already broken faith. Rome could present Hannibal as a dangerous young commander testing Roman credibility. Hannibal could present Rome as the old bully of Sardinia, using treaties when convenient and clients when treaties failed. The embassy did not resolve the dispute because it was not really asking a question both sides wanted answered. It was drawing positions. The envoys left Spain and went to Carthage, repeating the warning to the government there. The details of that discussion are not secure. Later tradition gives a stronger sense of factions: Hanno cautious, Barcid supporters energized, peace possible but rejected. The broad political reality is enough. Carthage could restrain Hannibal only by cutting against the Spanish recovery system that had made the city strong again. Rome was asking Carthage to police its most successful commander in the richest part of its restored empire. The demand did not land in an empty council chamber. It landed in a city that remembered the indemnity, Sardinia, Corsica, and the years when Roman pressure had found Carthage too weak to refuse. It also landed at a moment when Spain had become the proof that weakness was no longer inevitable. To back down over Saguntum would not simply avoid a war. It would reopen the older question of whether Roman diplomacy could still make Carthage retreat whenever the threat was hard enough. Hannibal began the siege of Saguntum in May 219 BC. The city was ready for a siege that could become a political signal. It had walls, stores, weapons, and the confidence that comes from believing help may come from a great power. Saguntum's position on a ridge near the sea made it difficult to reduce quickly, and its people had reason to expect that delay itself could be a strategy. The Carthaginian army had to take it the old way, through pressure, assault, attrition, and time. For 8 months the city held. The length of the siege is part of the story. If Saguntum had fallen in a week, it would have been a sharp incident. 8 months made it a decision repeated over and over. Hannibal kept the army committed. Saguntum kept resisting. Rome did not arrive. Carthage did not stop him. Every month made retreat more costly for Hannibal, rescue more urgent for Saguntum, and Roman inaction harder to explain after the fact. Steinby is especially important here because she preserves the uncomfortable point. Rome did nothing effective to help Saguntum during the siege. Later Roman histories tried to make the chronology more flattering, compressing events or moving embassies so that Rome appears to have acted while there was still time. Polybius gives the more credible explanation. Rome was occupied in Illyria, securing its Adriatic position against Demetrius of Pharos and the possibility of Macedonian entanglement, while the Carthaginian war was looming but not yet formally opened. Illyria was not a minor errand from Rome's point of view. Demetrius had broken earlier arrangements, raided, and threatened to pull Macedonian power toward the Adriatic. If Rome left that front unsettled while war with Carthage began, it risked fighting with an exposed flank across the sea to the east. The consuls went there, took Dimil, defeated Demetrius at Pharos, and secured the region before the Western War opened fully. In strategic terms, it made sense. In Saguntum, it meant no Roman army arrived. Rome's delay does not make it indifferent, it makes Rome strategic and delayed. The Senate could care about Saguntum and still choose first to finish an Adriatic problem. It could intend war with Carthage and still fail to relieve the city whose cause would justify it. Ancient states were not machines of instantaneous response. Distance, campaigning seasons, consular assignments, fleets, and other enemies mattered. So did reputation. A protected friend could become more useful to Rome after its fall than it had been during its defense. Because its destruction supplied the moral clarity, the treaty did not. For Saguntum, those distinctions were useless. The city held through summer, autumn, and into the dark end of the year. The suffering became the proof each side needed. To Rome, a protected friend was being destroyed while Hannibal ignored warnings. To Hannibal, a defiant city inside his sphere was being reduced at last. To Carthage, Spanish strength was demonstrating itself against a Roman client. To other Spanish communities, the lesson was sharper than law. Even a city with Roman ties could fall. When Saguntum was taken by storm, Hannibal gained money, slaves, and property. The booty mattered to an army built on reward. It also mattered politically. A successful siege paid the men, displayed command, and punished resistance. But the victory carried the war decision inside it. Rome could now make Saguntum not a local dispute but a treaty breach, an injustice, and a reason to demand satisfaction from Carthage itself. The city south of the line had done its work. It had turned ambiguity into commitment. After the news reached Rome, envoys went to Carthage. The Roman demand at Carthage was severe. Hannibal and the members of his council were to be surrendered or war would follow. On paper, this made the dispute a question of responsibility. If Hannibal had acted wrongly, Carthage could disown him. If Carthage refused, then the whole state accepted the act. In practice, the demand was almost impossible to accept. Hannibal was not merely an officer who had misbehaved at the edge of the map. He was the head of the Spanish command, chosen by the army, ratified by Carthage, heir to the system that had restored money, soldiers, and confidence after defeat. To hand him over would not only punish a general, it would break Barcid Spain invite Roman influence into the peninsula, and confess that Rome could decide the limits of Carthaginian recovery. The council scene must be handled carefully. Ancient speeches are rarely verbatim records, and Livy is both invaluable and literary. Later tradition gives Hanno and a peace party warning against the danger, and that memory is useful because Carthage was not a single mind. The city contained merchants, landowners, Barcid supporters, opponents, men who feared Rome, men who hated Rome, and men who simply understood that Spain was now too valuable to surrender without a fight. Even opposition to Hannibal did not make the Roman demand easy. A Carthaginian politician could dislike Barcid power, fear the family's military independence, and still see that surrendering Hannibal would leave Rome as arbiter of Spain. Hanno, if the tradition preserves the political mood at all, represents caution rather than submission. The choice was not between war and a comfortable peace. It was between war and a peace that might strip away the recovery system Carthage had spent nearly 2 decades building. The famous gesture compresses the decision into one image. A Roman envoy gathers his toga and says he carries peace and war, asking Carthage to choose. The Carthaginian reply leaves the choice to Rome. The envoy lets the fold fall to war. Whether the scene happened exactly that way matters less than why it survived. It made politics visible. 2 states had reached the point where each could say the other had chosen war. Rome could say Carthage refused justice. Carthage could say Rome had made an impossible demand. The legal debate over Saguntum did not disappear. It became part of the war's opening memory. That memory would matter because both states needed an origin story. Rome needed a violated friend and a refused demand. Carthage needed Roman interference and an ultimatum no sovereign state could accept. Saguntum gave each side a wound it could carry into mobilization. Rome expected the coming conflict to be fought in Spain and Africa, far from the streets of Rome itself. That expectation made clear military sense. The Spanish command was the problem, so Rome would send an army there. Carthage itself was the enemy capital, so another Roman army could move through Sicily toward Africa. The shape of the plan belonged to the lessons of the First Punic War: control the sea, attack the enemy's overseas base, and threaten the African homeland. It was a serious plan, not complacency, and it assumed that Roman naval mobility would let the Senate decide where pressure fell. Roman assumptions were sound on paper before Hannibal moved. Rome had the stronger navy, deeper Italian manpower, and allies around the western Mediterranean. Carthage had Spain, wealth, and Hannibal, but Spain could be invaded and Africa could be threatened. A Roman commander looking at the map in early 218 could reasonably expect to contain Hannibal in Iberia, while another army forced Carthage to defend its own walls. That expectation is what makes the next move so disruptive. Hannibal had a different answer once New Carthage became the staging point. At New Carthage, the spoils of Saguntum could be distributed, allies watched, and the army understood that the waiting period was over. The city had fallen. Rome had declared. Carthage had refused to surrender its general. The Ebro line, which once seemed to limit a war, now became only the first line Hannibal would leave behind.